A stone giant baffles a nation.
An introduction is a superstition.
One of our great musical compositions was written for a dog.
Can you imagine that? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is Lindsay McCarry back once more with an amazing array of actual facts with which to entertain you. My cohorts and I will be back in just a minute and a half, so wait for us, will you please? And true to our promise, here we are again. And to introduce our first choice item, listen to...
For man is like the sheep. Find him a leader, and blindly he follows. Asking not, wanting not. Show him the false and tell him the true, and he believes not his reason, but the more fanciful untruth.
Thus spake someone who was just a little bitter against man's proclivity to be blinded by a sudden flurry of excitement. And the proof? Well, listen to this. In the fall of the year 1869, the inhabitants of the verdant valley of Onondaga were startled when it was announced...
I tell you, it's true. It happened on the Newell farm. I saw it with my own eyes.
So what? What are you talking about?
I saw them uncover the giant. Petrified he was in limestone.
Huh?
And ain't a doubt but what he's real. Why, every feature in his face is as plain as any of yours. He's kind of bent over like something killed him before he had a chance to help himself.
Giant? Say, look here, is this some kind of a joke?
Oh, it ain't a joke. I'm telling you that I saw it with my own eyes. Just like it says in the good book. There were giants in those days, and you ain't gonna doubt that.
Well, no, I ain't, but... Well, I'm going to have a look for myself.
Yeah, so am I.
And thus was the discovery of the famous Cardiff Giant, announced to a startled country. The tiny hamlet of Cardiff, after which the huge figure was named, swarmed with visitors from far and near. In the dim light within the tent in which the giant was kept, people spoke only in awed whispers. The 12-foot gargantua seemed to impress silence upon his beholders. The authenticity of the figure was soon accepted by almost everyone, but scientific and theological opinions varied. Said a scientist,
That the figure found in Cardiff is proof that 12-foot men lived in prehistoric times is pure nonsense. We scientists deny the existence of such a race. Fossilized remains of life and garnered evidence must inevitably point to the folly of peopling the earth with prehistoric giants. The Cardiff giant is merely an idol, worshipped by a people or race long since vanished. That's final.
and said a minister,
The Cardiff giant only serves to prove all the more what science and so-called modernism try to disprove. That the word as found in the gospel is the final word, the one word and the only word. There were giants in those days. Those who try to say that the Cardiff giant is merely the object of some prehistoric worship are flying in the face of the divine, and that's final.
Thus went the quarrel, and the receipts for admission to see the Cardiff giant amounted to approximately $150,000. T.T. Barnum, master showman of his day, tried to buy it for exhibition, but he was refused. So he calmly went about having one made exactly like the original and exhibiting it as such. Then suddenly, one skeptic said of the original Cardiff giant,
Now, look, I managed to chip off a piece of the giant, and he's not made of Onondaga limestone as he should be, but of gypsum from an entirely different part of the country.
That started it. The trail led to one George Hull, brother-in-law of Newell, on whose farm the Cardiff giant was found. Taxed with evidence, Hull laughingly admitted to a reporter,
All right, my boy, I guess the jig's up. I've had my laugh, I guess, and proved my point.
What point, Mr. Hull?
Well, 2 years ago, I had an argument with the minister about the existence of giants on the earth. I couldn't convince him by argument that science has disproved that. So I decided to prove my point by making a laughingstock of him.
2 years ago? But how? Why?
All right, you'll have the whole story. Well, sir, for 2 years I studied archaeology and fossils. And then the time was ripe. I bought a huge slab of gypsum, then hired a carver to make it into the figure. As soon as I got the carving, I chiseled tiny holes in it. I rubbed it down with sand, and believe me, I wore calluses and blisters on my hands doing it, too. And then I bathed the whole giant in sulfuric acid. And when I finished, I had the Cardiff giant.
But for a hoax like that, why, you can...
I could be jailed?
Yeah.
Oh, no, not on your tin type, no. I didn't say it was a giant, did I? I didn't ask anyone to believe it, did I? No. I just had the old boy put into the ground on my own brother-in-law's farm. And they can't arrest me for that. The people did all the telling and believing themselves.
and so Mr. Hull had a good laugh for himself and set the country on its ears. Can you imagine that? Well, I'm sure you all have heard or at least seen pictures of the famous Leaning Tower in the city of Pisa, Italy. That strange 8-story structure, 179 feet high, almost 3 centuries old, which was in process of construction for almost 200 years. You know, it now leans 16.5 feet off its natural axis, and despite the fact that the foundation supporting the tremendous load is only 10 feet deep and is no bigger in circumference than the tower itself, the building hasn't fallen nor collapsed throughout all these many years. That is, not up to the present writing. Have you ever wondered about the reason for this apparently unnatural phenomenon? Of course, there must be a natural law governing it, and that is the law of statics, which enables a building to lean whose parts are firmly bound together and whose center of gravity doesn't go beyond the limits of the foundation. In the Leaning Tower of Pisa, there is a spiral stairway which was constructed with increased height on the side which leans and decreased height on the other side. This, of course, throws the greater weight on the side which is opposite to the one that's leaning. And that's why this amazing edifice has remained as a landmark and point of interest for travelers. Can you imagine that?
Mr. Brown, I want you to meet Mr. Smith.
How do you do, Mr. Smith?
How do you do, Mr. Brown?
Lindsay, what's that for? I mean that introduction.
Oh, that? Oh, I had the boys do that just to show we're not so civilized as we think we are.
What do you mean, Lindsay? Why, an introduction like that is just a sign of civilization. It's good etiquette.
Ah, and that's where you're wrong, young lady. We may imagine that primitive custom is etiquette, but it's just our way of holding on to an ancient superstition and then varnishing it with so-called etiquette.
Do you mean to tell me that an introduction like that is superstition?
Exactly. Let's imagine ourselves in the center of the jungle, in a little clearing. It's night. A throbbing drum signifies that a boy is being received into a primitive tribe upon his coming to manhood. In the clearing, apart from the rest of the tribe, the wise old witch doctor gives the boy the rules and taboos of the tribe. But more than that, he says,
Never give your name to a living soul, for with your name he can do you harm and bring upon your head the curses and the evil of all the dark spirits that harm man. Remember that above all, never give your name to a living soul.
But what's that got to do with a modern introduction, Lindsay?
just this. Today, when you're introduced to a person and you give your right name, that means that you're acknowledging him as a friend, one who would not use your name to work witchcraft upon you. In other words, you're trusting him with your life, a high compliment. Even today in Korea, it's bad form to utter the name of a parent or uncle. And among the Shoshone Indians, to give your name to a friend is paying him the highest compliment possible. And in parts of Australia, the exchange of names is believed by some of the Aborigines to be the most profound mark of brotherly greeting. Can you imagine that? And now for the musical portion of this edition of Can You Imagine That? You know, a great many of the famous compositions had their origins, or we might say inspirations, from strange sources. For none is more strange, or if you will, amusing, than the story of Frédéric Chopin's Minute Waltz. The Polish genius had the habit of falling in love with any woman who paid him the slightest attention. One of these, Madame Aurore Dudevant, better known to the literary world as George Sand, paid more than a slight attention to Chopin. He was hungry for affection and readily succumbed to her. Although she smoked big black cigars, wore men's attire, and was capricious and whim, Chopin did love her. And through that love came one of the most charming of Chopin's airy, delicate compositions. It seems that the composer was visiting her home in Paris. It is evening. George Sand sits in a comfortable chair. By her side is Frédéric Chopin. The smoke from her black cigar curls upward. Chopin speaks.
Aurore,
Eh? What?
what are you thinking of?
I wasn't thinking, Frederick, just watching.
Watching? Watching what, Sherry?
My dog. Look at him, Frederick. Just like a lot of humans trying to attain the unattainable.
Ah, but there's spice in that, Aurore, even when you don't attain it.
What? Stay to music, Frederick. You're much better at it than you are at philosophical reverie. See, he chases his tail around and around and around, never quite reaching it, always just an inch in back of it.
He's very funny, isn't he?
Frederick,
Yes, what is it, Aurore?
Frederick, you must write a waltz about my little dog.
What?
This minute, right away. Write a waltz about the dog. It must be music like he's chasing his tail, fast, whirling. Go to the piano, Frederick. Oh, hurry, hurry before the mood is gone.
Could I refuse, Aurore? All right. I shall put your little dog into music.
Quickly, Frederick. Oh, he's funny. And the music must be like that. Quickly now.
Chasing his tail. The unattainable. A whim of the moment.
Oh, stop mumbling, Frederick. Play. Right as you play. Quickly.
Yes, quickly.
Thus, so the story goes, the number was written by Frédéric Chopin and called the Minute Waltz, or known to musicians as the Valse in D-flat. Can you imagine that? Well, now I take pleasure in turning you over to your own announcer. As I say to you, this is Lindsay McCarry bidding you goodbye now.
The number 2 is unluckier than number 13.
Parental pride breaks up a picket line.
The thunder of machinery starts a great industry.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, those facts are all true. And this is Lindsay McCarry saying that my cohorts and I shall be back in just 1 minute and a half to prove them. So stay around, won't you? You know, there's a great deal of superstition that centers around the number 13. It's supposed to be unlucky, and in deference to some person's dread of it, hotels have no 13th floor, no rooms ending in the number 13. Some people will not sit down at a dinner table at which there are 13 guests present. In Hollywood, some of the studios, there are no sound stages number 13. Can you imagine that? But we said that number 2 is far more unlucky than number 13, and it is. However, in tarotology, or fortune-telling by cards, the number 2 by some authorities is supposed to mean happiness, sunshine, and so forth. But to the rulers bearing the number 2, it certainly doesn't have that meaning. For royalty, number 2 is doubly dangerous, and we may add to the old saying, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, by adding, and uneasy is the ruler who is the second of his name. The proof? Well, listen to this. Some strange, even weird aura of doom surrounds the number 2 when it is applied to a ruler, be he king or emperor. For listen. Nicholas II of Russia.
Shot down with his family at Ekaterinburg, Russia, July 16, 1918.
William II of Germany.
Abdicated 1918 at the close of the World War.
James II of England.
Died in exile September 17, 1701.
Francesco II of Sicily.
Died in exile December 27, 1894.
Charles II of France.
Deposed 887 A.D., died in poverty and exile January 18, A.D. 888.
Alexander II of Russia.
Murdered by nihilist bombs March 13, 1881.
Richard II of England.
Abdicated September 30, 1399, died in prison February 1400.
And so runs the list. But it isn't finished. The following rulers were either murdered, abdicated their thrones, or were deposed by force.
Charles II of Anjou.
Frederick II of Germany.
William II of England.
Manuel II of Portugal.
John II of France.
Peter II of Russia.
Harold II of England.
Franz II of Germany.
Edward II of England.
Ethelred II of England.
And there is the list. The fatal number 2 carried those crowned heads to either violent death or loss of country and throne. Can you imagine that? Well, here's a neat little bit of philology, meaning the study of language. In the late 1860s in San Francisco, there lived a gang of what we'd call today hoodlums. They wore spring-bottom trousers taken from early Spanish styles for men, double-breasted coats, and broad-brimmed black hats. Their leader was a bully named Bill Hood, and Hood and his gang became such a scourge in the community that local police came to call them, yes, the word is hoodlums, H-O-O-D-L-U-M-S, taken, of course, from the name of the leader, Hood, H-O-O-D. Can you imagine that? Well, monkey see, monkey do. I'll bet there isn't a parent in the country who hasn't said that to daughters or sons. Well, here's a case, a very funny one. It seems that in Chatham, Ontario, on February 18, 1937, a group of workmen were picketing a building which was being dismantled. A group of boys, curious, edged closer. Finally, one of them got up enough nerve to ask,
Say, mister, me and my pals here, we'd like to carry those banners for a while.
Huh? Go away, son. This is business.
Oh, please, mister. We want to have a parade.
No, listen.
Hey, let the kids carry him for a while. I'm tired.
Sure. You can sit down and rest, and me and my friends will carry him. We want to. Huh?
All right, here. Take this one. Get your buddies to take the other one, huh?
You bet. Hey, Billy, Ed, Tommy, hey, Smiley, we're going to get to carry the banners for a while. We can have a parade.
And carry the picketing banners they did. Proudly they marched up and down, their small shoulders carrying the burdens willingly, in fun. But soon...
Sure, I was telling
Hey,
Joe
wait
that...
a minute.
What's
Isn't
the matter?
that your kid over there in front of that building?
Yeah, huh? Where?
There, carrying that banner. Hey, it looks like those kids are picketing that building.
Oh, good grief. Look at that banner. Holy smoke, listen. I gotta get that away from the kid before my wife hears about it and those other kids. You go ahead. We'll catch up to you.
Well, maybe that isn't so funny, but it does get funny when we learn what the banners the boys were carrying had painted on them. In big letters, huge enough for all to read, were the words, "We want food." Can you imagine that? You remember, of course, that when Christopher Columbus first landed on the island of Guanahani in the West Indies and named this land San Salvador in commemoration of his miraculous preservation throughout the long voyage from Spain, he believed that he had found a new route to India, that this chain of islands really belonged to Eastern Asia, a belief which he carried with him to his death 14 years later. Well, here's a man whose memory carries with it the same sort of explorative error, Simon Fraser. Fraser was born an American colonial in Bennington, Vermont, about 1776. When he was only 16 years old, he became a fur trader with the Northwest Company, and at the age of 26 became a partner. Not contented with the trapping facilities in eastern Canada, Fraser explored the region beyond the Rocky Mountains and opened this vast territory for his company. As he blazed through this unmapped, unknown country, he came upon a rushing river, coursing its wild way through the series of deep gorges. At first, he thought he had discovered a new river, never before seen by the eyes of any white man. But upon consulting his charts, he decided he had come upon a portion of the Columbia River, already discovered years ago. When he returned to civilization, the British government decided that Simon Fraser had actually made the discovery of a new river, and the Crown offered him a knighthood. But believing his river was the Columbia, Fraser turned down the honor and died at the age of 82, still refusing to realize that he had actually discovered the now famous Fraser River. Can you imagine that?
Sweet are the uses of adversity.
Of course, everyone knows that quotation from Shakespeare, but here's a story of a man who put it to practical use. It was more than 25 years ago that a young man walked to his usual place in the factory where he was employed. In his hand, he carried a rubber mat. Very carefully, he put it down on the floor and then stood on it. Of course, his fellow workers weren't going to let this seeming bit of odd behavior go unheeded, and one of them asked the young man,
Hey, what's the big idea? Going hi-hat on us?
What do you mean, hi-hat?
Standing on a rubber mat. Afraid of catching cold or something?
Not at all, Ed. I just got tired of having this machinery jar the daylights out of me. This rubber mat I'm standing on takes out some of the shock.
Takes up some of the shock. Here, let me try it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, I'll be... Now, that's something, all right. By golly, it does help a lot, like standing on a soft cushion.
For several days, the young man stood on his rubber mat. Then the word spread around that someone stole the mat. But that didn't stop the young fellow. When he came to work another day...
What's the matter, kid? Get tired of bringing mats for other people to hook?
Nope. I got rubber mats now that nobody can steal.
You crazy? You ain't got no rubber mat there.
Yes, I have, Ed. Here, take a look at the heels of my shoes. See?
Say, ain't you the one? Nailing pieces of rubber to the heels of your shoes. Nobody can steal them from you.
I'll say they can't, Ed, and,
Huh? What's the matter?
nothing. Just thinking, that's all.
And what did the young man think about? Rubber heels. His name was O'Sullivan, and today his firm is one of the largest manufacturers of rubber heels in the world. Can you imagine that? What national flag do you suppose is the oldest in the world? No, it isn't the flag of Japan, nor Great Britain, certainly not Germany, Italy, nor France. It's the flag of Denmark. The simple cross of the Danish flag was selected as the national emblem more than 7 centuries ago, in the year 1219. Can you imagine that? And now, what flag do you think is the next oldest? Well, all right, we'll tell you. It's the Stars and Stripes of the United States, which was adopted on June 14, 1777. The British national flag, the Union Jack, was adopted in 1801, the year of the Union of Great Britain and Ireland. And that union gives the Union Jack its name. Comes now the time for another lesson in musical oddities. Or rather, comes now the time for you to test your wits and see if you can detect the traces of a popular song of a few years back in one of the classic arias from Wagner's musical drama, Tannhäuser. First, we're going to have the orchestra run off a few bars of To an Evening Star, which Wolfram sings in Tannhäuser. You ready? All right, sharpen up your wits and try to catch part of the popular melody. you get it? What? You're not going to give up? All right, here's the popular number. It's Sweethearts. Listen to it, and you'll note the similarity. And no pun intended there. And with that, we turn you over to your own station announcer and say to you, this is Lindsay McCary saying goodbye now.